Welcome everyone to the Talent Connections and Career Spa Wednesday webinar series. This is Tom Darrow. We are just going to give everybody just a couple minutes to join us here. I can see a lot of folks joining us right now, so we'll give it just a minute and we'll get started. Okay, everyone, why don't we go ahead and jump in? I'm sure we'll have some more folks join us here as we get going, but thank you for joining us today. You've got a real treat ahead of us, our Wednesday webinar series for Talent Connections and Career Spa. And again, this is Tom Darrow, and I'm going to be kicking it off and introducing our presenter, Matt, here in just a minute. So today's topic is recruitment in 2018. Out with the old and in with AI. And if you haven't noticed, artificial intelligence is like the hot topic these days in HR and in business. So very, very timely topic. And we appreciate TalView presenting this through our Wednesday webinar series. So just a quick overview. So this webinar will go for 1 hour. If you have any technical questions, you can see on the screen there, but I'll read the number in case you're not on the internet, maybe you're just listening in. The call-in number is 1-800-263-6317. All participants are currently muted, but if you are wanting to ask a question, we will have time at the very end for questions. You can use the chat feature to submit your questions. We have quite a few people who have signed up for this webinar, so we certainly might not be able to get to all of your questions. But any questions that we don't get to, we will be able to capture those, and I'm sure Matt and TalView will be happy to follow up with you later, if at all possible. This webinar is approved for 1 SHRM professional development credit, and we'll give you that code at the end of the webinar. So with that, let's go ahead and kick it off. So let me introduce you to TalView. If you haven't heard of TalView, they're an artificial intelligence-enabled talent assessment technology, and they help employers build a high-performing workforce. They've got a great solution. In fact, I just literally saw this morning on LinkedIn that they won the IBM Beacon Award for Outstanding Talent Management Solutions. So congratulations to TalView. They've already got many Fortune 500 companies that they call clients. And they've served clients across 102 countries. So very robust platform and company. So let me introduce Matt. So Matt, I'm thrilled to say that Matt calls me his friend. We both work out of Atlanta, Georgia. And Matt has over 25 years of experience. He started when he was 2. But he's got 25 years of experience in the HRtech industry. Let me tell you a little bit more about him. So Matt currently is the Chief Sales Officer for TalView. He has seen a strong shift through the years in the way organizations hire, the tools that they use, and the importance of consolidating solutions to ensure better efficiency and effectiveness for their recruiters, while also providing a much more engaging candidate experience. Prior to TalView, he was head of sales for several different companies, one called PAN. If you're not familiar with PAN, the Performance Assessment Network, which I know has done a lot of work, in particular with SHRM National through the years. He also had significant sales leadership roles with Higher IQ. I think that's when I first met Matt. It was either that or when he was with SHL. He also worked at MRI Worldwide. Matt is a very proud Sparty, having graduated from Michigan State University. So with that, Matt, it's all yours.
Appreciate it, Tom. Thanks for that glowing introduction. The check's in the mail, so be looking for that. Well, welcome everyone. We truly appreciate you taking the time to learn some things today, and we hope that you'll come away with some really good information that that really we've compiled at TalView, and things that really that we've witnessed over the past number of years. And as Tom mentioned, some of the previous companies where I was previously head of, we've seen a really strong shift among companies in terms of how they screen and select talent, and we hope to give you some insight on that today. But let's start by talking a little bit about the state of global HR today, and we'll kick it off with a little video we've prepared that gives you a little insight on some of the dramatic things that sometimes we don't know are happening without actually paying attention to it, because things are happening so quickly. So let's kick it off with that. So hope everyone was able to watch that and get a little perspective. You know, we live in such a fast-moving world, and I think one of the things that we can all say, since we all work in the HR space, is that organizations are finally recognizing that really the nucleus and the stronghold of where everything happens is within HR. Hiring the right talent, taking care of that talent, making sure that you are able to adapt with the significant changes that are happening. So let's talk for a minute about some of the challenges that you can expect as we continue here in 2018 and beyond over the next number of years. You know, as we think about the changing dynamic of the workforce today, by the year 2025, 75% of the global workforce will be of millennial age. 46% of the companies cite that competition as the biggest obstacle in terms of attracting top talent. We often hear there's a war for talent, particularly in times today where the economy seems to be doing much better. 56% of HR leaders state their capability in leveraging social media is still weak. They're not figuring out how they can tap into really the easiest element of being able to attract the right types of talent for an organization. And 73% of business leaders are concerned today about the availability of key skills. And we see this all the time because you can no longer, in this fast pace and fast changing world, hire people based on the skill set that they have for the job that you're hiring them for today. Because in 6 months, that job might be totally different. So how are you looking at talent in terms of the ability for them to learn new skills, their ability to be able to adapt and move on to different things? So we really need to prepare for a digital transformation of HR. And we see this in a lot of organizations today that have always done things the same way. And some of those things just simply do not work in today's fast changing world and the way that candidates want to be engaged and attracted to work for a company. And 78% of the largest CEOs still say that they're using multiple channels to find talent, but they're not able to figure out how to best leverage it to be able to do that. It's also becoming a much more global workforce. 71% of organizations now have to look for talent in different geographies, whether it's in different geographies within their state, the country, or globally. And obviously various demographic segments because of a lack of skill set that may be prevalent in a specific demographic that they are looking to target. Okay. Now, in order to really take advantage of all of those things, you really need to take a look at technology, but recognize what are the true benefits of technology. As Tom had mentioned during the onset, artificial intelligence and AIs, we have this conversation at our company all the time. AI hasn't even reached its peak yet, but in many respects, it's almost already an overused acronym because people don't really know what it is, how to leverage it, how it works for their specific organization. And HR in particular, it's become somewhat of a confusing state with a lot of organizations saying, hey, you need AI, we have AI, you've got to leverage it. But really what it boils down to is how do you drive efficiencies and effectiveness internally for your recruitment and administrative staff while ensuring you have a much more engaging candidate experience that narrows a lot of things. So those that leverage technology effectively and really take a look at HR not simply from a cost structure standpoint, as a lot of organizations still do, but recognizing that if we do things appropriately within HR, within talent acquisition, recruitment, and learning and development, we're actually going to impact our bottom line. We're going to stay ahead of our competition. And we're going to do things like reduce attrition. We're going to do things like improve employee performance because we're identifying the right people and the right skill set. So it's 80% operational efficiencies if you leverage technology in the right way. Internal collaboration, external collaboration, a dramatic improvement, as you can see there as well. But in order to meet those challenges, you need to be prepared to modernize. You have to be prepared to think out of the box. You have to recognize that one of the most dangerous phrases in the English language is, we've always done it this way. Those companies that have always done it the same way, a lot of them are no longer around. Kodak as an example. They refuse to get on board with the digital transformation of photography and digital printing, and as a result, they've really struggled. Now, the global marketplace is looking for a number of things. One of the things we're recognizing is that a lot of organizations, particularly on the enterprise side, those with 1,000 employees or more, as an example, use a lot of different pinpoint solutions. A lot of them might be really good solutions, but you want to be able to consolidate some of those solutions, leverage technology to be able to, really have systems be able to speak to one another and be able to leverage it in the appropriate way. So you want to be able to consolidate. You will need to be able to hire for skills to cope with market disruption. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, hiring people simply for the skill set of the current job is a mistake. You need to be able to think 6 months, 12 months, 24 months out if this person's ability is going to be able to adapt to the changing in our company, to the change in the market, to the change within competition, and if these people have some of those soft skills, as an example, such as learning ability, cognitive, critical thinking, to be able to adapt with that. You need to increase the pace of hiring. One of the critical factors that we often hear is that it takes too long for an organization to bring somebody on board. And when there is a war for talent, candidates are going to make decisions and want decisions quickly. They want to be engaged and move through the process. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of these things in just a couple of minutes. It needs to be an engaging candidate experience. And it specifically says for today's candidate. And really what that implies is that the old way of doing things doesn't work for the modern workforce. It doesn't work for the millennial workforce in particular. For example, simply posting a job out someplace, having that person click on the job, getting sent to an applicant tracking system where they might fill out an application, maybe are asked some minimum qualifying questions, and then praying to hear from a recruiter that engages them in a process does not work for the modern workforce. They want to be engaged. They want to immediately recognize that, hey, do I have an opportunity at this particular job?
And modern organizations also recognize that that initial engagement with a candidate is actually the first reflection of your brand. So HR isn't just HR. HR is marketing. HR is sales. HR is this talent attraction component. And how you engage with that candidate and how you engage them in that process is going to have a huge deciding factor in whether or not they want to come work there. There is a lot of research that shows that even if somebody is hired by you, if their screening, selection, and onboarding process leaves a negative connotation with them, they are much more likely to leave the organization sooner because that negative connotation of how they are treated during that process lingers with them. So it has to be an engaging candidate experience. It has to be something that is a reflection of your brand. And then you also need a, we've all heard the phrase over the years, think locally, act globally, or maybe act locally, think globally. Those are the things that you really need to think about. How do we expand our reach? How do we attract people? And just because somebody is geographically undesirable today from an interviewing capability standpoint, leverage AI tools to be able to engage with them a lot sooner. So if we look at the talent acquisition process today, as I pointed out, the job posting, those elements that the applicant tracking systems typically do very well, the application management, compliance, those types of things. Those are critical components. But how do I very quickly engage people in that screening and selection process and make it that is engaging so that we get them to that offer management approach and then the onboarding? How do we do some of these things? Okay, so let's talk about some of the critical metrics and the critical talking points that we're all very familiar with in HR. For example, this idea of time to fill, leveraging past data to find out how long a position is going to be open, and really thinking about it by flipping the script, because we want those open jobs in a sense to die quickly, but we're not able to do that because we still employ the same process. So how am I going to get somebody quicker through the process if I'm still doing it the old way? And then if you do it appropriately, now you can set realistic and reasonable expectations with hiring managers and allocate the appropriate resources for some of those roles that are much harder to fill. Okay, so we need to think about it a little bit differently, not just, hey, our time to fill is 45 days. Well, if you're in a war for talent and there's a limited number of people out there that might come and work for you, how are we going to shorten that? Well, you can't shorten it by doing things the same way. Okay, then critically, obviously, are they a fit for my requirement? And the right fit doesn't often translate into, the actual search that you're doing. So I hear all the time, one of the critical complaints that HR has with that the business has with respect to HR is, the recruiter comes to me and says, oh, I really like this person. The hiring manager doesn't care if you really like this person. They want to know if they can do the job for today and the job 6 months from now. That's what they're interested about. So it's really important that you not just look for skills, experience, you also look for a lot of those soft skills within a specific or a broad geography. And then making sure that the person is affordable, that they're interested in the job. How do you combine all of those things? It's very difficult if you still employ the standard manual processes, relying on junior recruiters to do those screening components for you. Things like a behavioral interview. People always say, hey, we do a behavioral interview. Well, if you really do your research in terms of a behavioral interview, true behavioral interviews are conducted by a professional interviewer that are able to assess someone's behavioral skills and then match them to the skill set required for a job, or match them to specific culture components within an organization. Simply having a list of questions that where you follow a script and then have the recruiter make a very broad assessment of that person's behavior is not a real behavioral interview. AI can help you with that, and they can leverage that, and we'll talk about that. And then how do I sort through the results? How do I make decisions about who it is that I should move forward in the process or remove from the process? So it's really important to take a look at all of those components to make sure that I'm actually sifting through the right people. And it's equally important of screening people out as it is screening people in. And then the ever in those areas where I get a lot of candidates or only a significant amount of candidates that have, that high level, at a high level, the skill set that I'm looking for, how do I respond to everyone? I don't have the resources typically, because HR typically are stretched and don't have the bandwidth to really do some of those things. And as I mentioned earlier, candidates want to know that they're involved and they're engaged in the process, that somebody is listening to them, that somebody actually wants them. And it's often impossible when looking at old processes to be able to respond to everyone. Well, leveraging technology and I helps that, and responding to some of those people in a manner that is consistent with that also helps. And then what about testing? We have a lot of different tests out there. We've got tests for screening, tests for selection, specific skills or knowledge tests, critical thinking tests. What types of tests are the best instruments for me? Okay, from a core skill set perspective, hey, if I'm an engineer and I need a specific engineering skill set, that part of it might be easy to translate your skill, or if you're an accountant. But what about those behavioral components, those soft skills, or the cognitive, the critical thinking components? Leverage things like computer vision technology and natural language processing technologies, because they help you to analyze their speech, the facial expressions, the confidence in their voice, and some of those soft skills that are imperative in today's changing dynamic of the workplace. And then being able to find out who's the best available candidate. How do I identify that? How do I compare candidates? How do I build a matrix based on the data that I've captured to stack rank those candidates on all of those skills combined? It's nearly impossible to do that from an objective standpoint if we're utilizing old manual processes. I need to leverage technology to be able to do that. Now, it all starts with really, when you look at building the right team perspective or identifying the right candidates, in making sure you look at the whole person, kind of a holistic view. Their behaviors, their knowledge, their experience, their cognitive ability, their preferences, how do they fit into the culture? How does all of that fit together? And what am I doing from a data standpoint? If I'm a really effective recruitment department, my job shouldn't end when I've identified a candidate that ultimately gets hired. My job should be, how does that person performing over time that I identified as the person that we ultimately brought on board? How are they performing? How are they performing against the existing people that were there, against other people that were hired? Are they staying longer? How is my attrition with respect to the people? And then matching that back to how the reasons that you identified that person in the first place. How did they score on their cognitive ability tests? What type of behaviors did they demonstrate that matched up to that particular job, to that particular department, or the culture of the organization? So it's imperative that we not just look at who was hired, but obviously their performance, and obviously all of those components were done in a manner, hopefully, that has improved our efficiencies and effectiveness for our recruitment team. Now, the behavioral insight component of a lot of the artificial intelligence components that are out there today and that are being refined really almost on an hourly basis as we see them in the marketplace today, really get into the real core behavioral components. Automating that process that I described a couple of minutes ago of a real behavioral interview to be able to recognize speech, the tone and effectiveness of their voice, the words that people are using, the relevant components of the answers, and then really leveraging all of these elements that I'm circling here, from natural language processing, video interviewing technology, and emotion recognition. That is where artificial intelligence is really heading. And for some organizations like TalentViews, it is already there. So it's really important that as you think about changing how you might want to change how you screen and select candidates today, that you really do an internal assessment of what do we need to change? What are the best technology components that are out there? Does it make sense for us in terms of how we want to change things going forward? Really do an internal assessment, and there's a lot of good organizations out there that can help you make an assessment in terms of what you might want to change. And then really critically, are the organizational change management elements. We see oftentimes organizations that want to change, but only half the organization is on board. This has to be a real directive and a real commitment to changing the way you've always done things so that you can automate those things that you feel that you've been doing from a manual perspective. And then leverage some of the tools that are out there, some of the intelligent proctoring tools that are out there. And it seems in many respects kind of futuristic when you think about some of the things that are out there. I know that, you know, some of the things that we see happening in the space today in the market are almost scary in terms of what the capabilities are that are out there. But if you leverage the right tools for your organization in the right manner, you're going to have dramatic impact in terms of how you hire, who you hire, and then bottom line performance of the organization, so that you can go back to leadership and say, yeah, you know what, we spent $500,000 modernizing our HR and recruitment and talent acquisition functionality. But as it has led to 12% increase in our performance, our attrition has dropped by 8%. We've got a more engaged workforce. We've got candidates and a greater reflection of our brand. We now have people reaching out to us because they want to come work here based on what we've been able to do from a brand building and brand recognition standpoint. So really take a look at some of those things in terms of how they impact, because there are some really amazing tools that are out there that can do things like face detection, face voice authentication, so that now if you typically were to require laying eyes on a candidate to be able to engage them in kind of that second, third, or maybe a final stage of the process, you know, now you can drive a lot of efficiencies, effectiveness, and drive and save a lot of money by doing it in an online fashion if you've got the right tools that are able to authenticate that person's identity, validate that they're the ones that are taking the test that you've put in front of them, and then also record all of their activity, including their pre-recorded and live interviews, so that you actually have a record of that candidate, and multiple people can look at that to make an educated decision as to whether or not that person is able to perform best in your particular role. So there are a lot of tools out there. So I ask you to really take a look at some of those things that are available to you from a resource and from an artificial intelligence standpoint. So, you know, as I mentioned a minute ago, how some of these things are, you know, almost futuristic that we see at some point. You know, if you really still think of artificial intelligence and science fiction, you really do need to think again. Not only is it no longer fiction, it's here, and it's here to stay. And those organizations that are prepared to modernize with those changes that are happening today, they're the ones that are going to have an edge over the competition. They're the ones that are going to impact how you engage with candidates and want people to come work there, versus the old ways that are really becoming outdated. And I hear people all the time say, you know, this is kind of scary, and I don't know if candidates want to be engaged in this manner. We like this personal touch approach. Well, I'm here to say that I assure you that if it's done appropriately and you do something that matches your corporate profile or the profile that you want to change to keep up with times or stay ahead of the competition, if you do it in the right manner, it's going to be much more engaging. You know, is it engaging a candidate if they're sitting around waiting for a recruiter to reach out to them? You know, imagine them being immediately engaged into an interview process, being able to engage them with gamified systems and approaches and visual communication and simulations, and at the same time being able to capture the right type of data that are going to help you as an organization make the type of hiring decisions you need to make in a much quicker fashion to stay ahead of the competition. And to validate that, there are a lot of industry case studies that are out there. You know, let's say you're an organization that has a large number of applicants and you're still doing it with a centralized recruitment approach. Okay, why not leverage a remote proctored video assessment solution that automatically builds a behavioral profile? And imagine being a large volume hiring organization to where you're completely in an automated fashion be able to screen and assess nearly 10,000 candidates And doing all of that in just a matter of 2.5 months, and being able to make hiring decisions that not only mirror but are much better than the ones that you're doing from a manual standpoint perspective. Or imagine that you have got long lead times and it's taking you forever because you're working across different time zones. You're having a difficult time getting the hiring managers on board. I have this conversation with HR leaders all the time, because oftentimes HR is measured on time to fill. And I would argue for a lot of organizations, that measurement should be time to present a candidate to the hiring manager, because oftentimes getting a hiring manager to actually interview the final list of candidates and coordinating those schedules. Well, what if you've got AI tools that help you with scheduling, that allow the video interviews that have been proctored and validated for them to take a look at it in that fashion in a 24/7 environment, how much quicker that process is able to be. You're able to have panel time that is saved. You're able to reduce that time to hire in a significant fashion. Take a look at the tools that are out there that are going to help you be able to dramatically improve some of these things. And I talked earlier about, organizations want to combine solutions because they've got a lot of pinpoint activity that's going on. Well, maybe it's just one of those things that need to be changed for your organization. Take a look at what's out there, discuss internally, find some of the consultants and experts out there that can direct you so that you can do what's best for your organization. And the level of tolerance is different for organizations in terms of how much they want to change all at once. Be able to address that. But do yourself a favor from an HR perspective. Make the cases to your executive leadership, to the decision-making components in your organization, and come in with facts and have some solutions ready to show them and how they impact bottom line for the organization. So, performance prediction by leveraging past performance data. We've all talked about, some of those, the bio data and some of those things. No alignment of role descriptions with hiring methodology, and a high proportion of poor performing hires. So this particular case study, there's a lot of different organizations. So now let's take a look at, existing relationship managers. You've leveraged video interviewing, and then start to build predictive modeling based on performance history of those people that are hired and make changes. It's interesting to me how many times I talk to HR and talent acquisition leaders that are still doing things exactly the same way they've done things 10, 12, 15 years ago, and they're scratching their head and can't figure out why nothing has changed with attrition, with performance, and the decisions that they're making around who they're hiring. You've got to change the way you're doing things if you're going to change the way the outcomes that you're expecting on the back end. So take a look at some of those things, and you'll get some of these statistics that we're seeing in some of these case studies here. So there's really, the moral of the story is really take a look at the way you're doing things today. Take a look at some of the challenges that have been provided to HR around what is happening within the organization, whether it is the changing dynamic in terms of the workforce, the impact or the lack of impact on performance against competition, challenges with respect to attrition, challenges with respect to identifying high potentials that you can put forth to be the next leaders of the organization. How are you assessing them? How are you tracking them? And are you looking back at how you screened and selected them to see if mistakes were made there in terms of why you decided on someone and that was ultimately hired that is not the type of performer that you expected or anticipated they would be? Do a thorough internal analysis, and I absolutely implore you to seek outside guidance of organizations that bring in, of people that bring a fresh perspective to how you're doing things. Open yourself up to constructive criticism about how you're doing things, why you're doing things a certain way, and what can be done to change. Because if you don't do that and you don't get buy-in, you don't have the data and specifics to send to leadership around how and why you want to make a change, so that from the top down, they are the ones that direct the organizations to have this 100% adoption across the board so that it really works. If you're not prepared to do that, you're not going to be able to keep up with the changing dynamic of the workforce today. So I will stop there and turn it back over to Tom and see if there's any questions that may have come in that we can address.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matt. Good information. So yes, so anyone who has a question, off to the side, you'll see the chat feature. You can type in a question. We've actually got a few that have come in, so we'll get to those. But please send send in your questions here for Matt. So Matt, the first question, is this solution specific to a particular skill set or education stream?
No, it really isn't. I mean, that's the beauty about leveraging technology and modernizing things. It's across the board. And if we take a look at, in terms of our customer base as an example, we span across all industries. And as you pointed out, we're active in over 100 different countries with different dynamics, different cultures, different elements. So it really isn't limited. The key is, as I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, understand your organization and the roles particularly that you're looking to impact to determine where you can have the greatest impact. For some organizations, it's maybe just one line. If you're, a large customer, somebody like a consulting firm that also has a call center division or a customer service division, maybe it's just that division that needs to be impacted. But it isn't limited. The key is to set it up in a manner consistent with what's going to work for your organization. But it is across the board, and it really isn't limited by job level, job type, or the skill set that is required, as long as you set it up appropriately. I'll add one other thing to that. Organizations that are still doing things the old way often say, we're really concerned about having a consistent process, which is why we have our recruiters touch base with them first and do that initial screen. I'm not sure if technology might not open us up to some litigation. I assure you, without any hesitancy, that you open yourself up much greater chance of litigation if you are utilizing a manual workforce that isn't following an exact process for every single candidate, and then making very subjective decisions about who should move forward or not, versus having technology be that driver with an incredibly consistent process, everyone doing it the exact same way, and then maintaining a record of that process. That is the way you protect yourself. That is the way you build a consistent process that holds up in any type of situation.
Okay, wonderful. Another question here, Matt. I'm concerned about dramatically changing the way we attract and screen candidates. Why is an automated approach better?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $64,000 question that we get all the time. It's a much more engaging approach. Imagine for a minute, as the example that I pointed out earlier, the old way of doing things where somebody waits. Now imagine a job being posted somewhere and then leveraging technology and artificial intelligence to where by clicking on a link, they're not sent to the applicant tracking system, filling out stuff and then waiting to contact it, but are immediately engaged in a screening and selection process where it could be a combination of assessments, maybe it's pre-recorded interview, and at the same time, on the back end, the customer, the recruitment team is able to validate their identity, proctor them, maybe be able to immediately build a behavioral profile because you're leveraging some of those things like natural language processing and speech recognition. It's a much more engaging process than what you see today. And it gets back to what I was saying, though, a second ago. You have to get buy-in from the very top in order to make the kind of change that your organization can tolerate. We have some customers that over time make changes and others that dive right in and make dramatic changes because they're losing out to their competition, losing out to really good talent. I'll give you another example, a real life example. A couple of months ago, I was in Seattle and speaking with Chuck Edward, the head of talent acquisition for Microsoft. And he has a very unique problem. As he pointed out, he said, our competition for talent is against the other biggies in our space. Amazon, Google, Facebook, and everybody wants to work at those companies and Microsoft, and he said, I'm less concerned about screening people out than I am about screening people in. I need to have an engaging and inclusive process. And the only way he can do that is with technology. And the reason that is, he has thousands of recruiters all over the world interviewing for Microsoft talent. And he can tell them, hey, I need you to be more inclusive. We need to make sure that we screen people in. But that doesn't mean there's going to be a consistent process among all those 1,000 recruiters around the world. The only way to do that is set up an effective and engaging candidate experience program and leverage technology to be able to do that, so that you have a consistent process. You can set it up with the interactive dynamic components that you have and still ensure that you're screening people in an effective manner so that you still make the decisions around hiring the right people. Just because you're focused on inclusion and diversity and screening people in does not mean you need to be less focused around hiring the right people. The only way to do something like that is technology, and it makes for a much more engaging candidate experience than what we see the manual processes providing today.
Good answer. Good answer. Here's another question for you. Our recruiters do a good job of screening. So I think they already do a good job of screening. Why should we change?
Yeah, that gets back to what I mentioned just a minute ago. And a lot of recruiters do a really good job of screening. I think in the vast majority of organizations, though, it really boils down to an engaging candidate experience, modernizing the way you do it today. Recruiters can't get to everyone typically. They often miss good candidates because they don't get bandwidth. For example, if I'm a recruiter or a team of recruiters and I have hundreds of candidates that come in, I just go down one by one. Well, the best 5 candidates might be at the very bottom that you never get to, just because you don't have the bandwidth and you found people, hey, these people seem like they fit the bill. Well, what if there's people that are better that you never had a chance to get to? Well, now through leveraging technology, you're able to do that. Now, the nice thing is this doesn't mean you get rid of your recruitment team. What this means is now your recruiters are going to be much more effective because they're only going to interact with people that have already been screened, that have already been assessed. Maybe they've already conducted a pre-recorded video interview, and you can screen many more people and then only have that live contact with the most qualified individuals. So now you're going to be much more effective, and you no longer have to go to a hiring manager and say, I really like this person. Hey, these are the 5 people. Here's how they were assessed. Here's how they scored. Here's how their video interview looked. Mr. or Mrs. Hiring Manager, take a look. These are the 5 people I think are the best for us to interact with. So it's not that the recruiters are necessarily doing a bad job. It's that they could be doing much better, be much more effective, and take advantage of the technology that is out there so that you are ensured of hiring the very best people.
Wonderful, wonderful. I've got one more question as of now, but again, if anyone has a question, use the chat feature to submit your question. So Matt, here's a question. Does this open me up to litigation?
Yeah, and I think I touched on that a little bit. I think it actually protects you from litigation. Getting back to recruiters, it's not that they do a poor job. In many instances, they do a fantastic job. And I'm sure we have recruiters here on the line, and you know you do a good job. You know you have your company's best interest in mind, and you want to make the right match and everything. But it's impossible to be 100% consistent because if you're interacting with so many different candidates, you make very subjective decisions that oftentimes can come back and bite you. Totally unintended. Totally unintended in the vast majority of instances. If you have a consistent process and an engaging process, and then you maintain a record of what has happened, you're going to be protected because you can now make the validated decisions. And now multiple people, as an example, can look at that interview. You could have panels maybe scoring interviews and making those more objective decisions, and then having a record of that, and not use your own biases in terms of who you're interacting with, how you're interacting with them, whether or not you personally like or dislike the way they responded to a particular question or a particular interaction that you had with them. So you're actually, if it's set up properly and you measure for the right competencies based on the job requirements for a particular role, and every single candidate that you screen for that particular role goes through the exact same process, you will be protected.
Okay, wonderful. Matt, I think that's all the questions I have. Any last comments you'd like to make? Otherwise, we'll work toward wrap up.
No, I appreciate. Hopefully, this was of some value to folks on the call today. I'm glad I was able to share some things. As Tom mentioned earlier, feel free to reach out to us if you have any lingering questions beyond this here today. I'm happy to answer those questions for you, and we appreciate everyone's time today, and hopefully you found some value.
Great, great. Thank you, Matt. And everyone can see Matt's email address here on the screen. I know he'd be happy to connect with you. Matt is truly one of the class acts in our profession. So thank you for just a great webinar and good information, Matt. If any of you are interested in going through this again, we do record it, and we have all of our webinars from the past recorded and available. You can see those at our website at talentconnections.net. Also, as promised, here is the code for SHRM recertification credit. And again, for those of you who aren't watching the screen, let me say it for you. It is 18-J as in Jim, R as in Randy, the number 3, F as in Frank, M as in Mary. So that's the code for one recertification credit hour through SHRM. Wonderful. Well, just a big thank you to everybody for joining us today, and watch for future announcements regarding our Wednesday webinar series. We've actually got them scheduled through the end of the year and even into next year. So a lot of great topics coming. We appreciate your time. We're giving everyone back about 12 minutes here to go get some lunch if you haven't already. Thanks for joining us, and have a great balance of the week, everyone. And thanks again to Matt and Talview. Take care.